The very solemn rites of Holy Week contain some really ancient elements, including the proclamation of the Lord's Passion as it is told by each of the evangelists. Jesus' Passion, of course, is the very center of our Christian faith, so we need to reflect deeply and prayerfully on it each time that we recall it or read it or hear it proclaimed. Each of the evangelists has his own way of telling what happened, and each of them brings us very precious testimony. John's Gospel brings out some very profound meanings, which we will talk about in just a moment. First of all, we need to remember that thousands and thousands of people were crucified under Roman rule for a great variety of crimes and offenses. It was reserved as punishment for non-Roman citizens, outsiders, marginal people, slaves. It was usually a prolonged way of death by blood loss, exposure to the elements, and finally by asphyxiation when the crucified could no longer reach themselves up to take another breath. Now, it is certainly possible to dwell on the pain and suffering of this violent and cruel way of dying. It's an important strand in our religious practice, after all. But all such executions, very importantly, are attempts to destroy, obliterate, and to turn people into non-persons, non-beings, things forgotten and abandoned. Because of who the victim was in Jesus' case, the very opposite happened. A major part of our work in this life is to ensure that forgetting can never be a possibility for us. St. John's Gospel doesn't concentrate much on the physical aspects of pain and suffering at all. What it does bring out is the meaning in a way that resounds in every generation. We may quite rightly ask, why does Jesus' death by crucifixion have such significance among all those other thousands who suffered in exactly the same way? Why does Jesus' death by crucifixion and then his ultimate resurrection have so much significance for us? The answer to those questions, as St. John the Evangelist makes it very clear for us, is in who Jesus was and in the meaning of what happened to him on that day. Everything in our faith is centered here. We bring it into living memory as we do so in each and every Mass. John the Evangelist's telling of it is his way of coming to terms with the meaning of Jesus' Passion. It's the way that centuries of Christians, including ourselves, come to terms with it too. Jesus' Passover from death to new life is our salvation. First of all, John's Gospel, throughout the Gospel, emphasizes Jesus' divinity. He makes it perhaps especially clear in the telling of the Passion. When Jesus was about to be arrested by temple authorities and temple soldiers, faithful Jews, he asked them who they were looking for. They replied, Jesus of Nazareth, answering, I am he. Jesus used for himself the divine name, which is the name, of course, that was revealed to Moses in the Old Testament from the burning bush, when a voice spoke to him saying, I am who am. I am the divine name. In fact, Jesus used the divine name 3 times in John's telling of the Passion, really within a few moments of each other. The arresting party at the mention of the divine name fell prostrate before him, fell on their faces, as some of the translations say. From this point on, what happened to Jesus is not an arrest in the usual sense. It is his free giving of himself, as he gave it so freely in the first Eucharist, just before all of this happened. So it is Jesus who determines what happened, not really the Romans or the temple authorities or whoever. Because being divine, Jesus had the freedom to act. And here he acted with that divine freedom. In doing so, he acted with the freedom of a king. Pontius Pilate interrogated Jesus, asking him whether he is the king of the Jews, an accusation apparently passed on to Pilate by the temple authorities. When Pilate brought Jesus outside onto the balcony of where they were, an angry mob clamored for his death, saying he called himself the King of the Jews. The irony is that they themselves had proclaimed him as king on his triumphal into Jerusalem, as we celebrate every Palm Sunday. Jesus said to Pilate, my kingship is not of this world. For this I was born. For this I came into the world. I am a king. I am divine. This is my mission here. Then Jesus told Pilate that Pilate had no authority over him. So what was about to happen was not just a Roman or temple decision. Being divine and king meant that what Jesus did was with divine and royal freedom. Jesus was handed over to the Roman soldiers for crucifixion. he was scourged to weaken him, then crowned with thorns, clothed in royal purple, and mocked by the Roman soldiers, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." Again, the deepest irony is that Jesus, even at this terrible moment, is not just King of the Jews, he is Lord Jesus Christ, King of the universe, as we celebrate in the Feast of Christ the King every year. People objected, but Pilate refused to change the sign. So Jesus died there freely as the divine King of the universe. Now this sacrificial act of self-emptying, of self-offering for the sins of the whole world is for all of humanity, for our salvation. In this act, Jesus is our high priest who offers sacrifice for us in all eternity. The sacrifice he made is his very own self. These are just some of the insights that John the Evangelist brings to Jesus' telling of the Passion. Rather than dwelling on pain and suffering, which were certainly there, of course, St. John helps us to realize that in Jesus' self-sacrificial death, everything becomes forever clear. He is divine. He is our King. He is our priest in all eternity. Our only possible response must be utter silence in wonder, awe, reverence, and prayerful adoration. But above and beyond all of those, for that silence and wonder and awe and reverence and adoration arise from this, from our gratitude for our thankfulness for what Jesus did and accomplished there. Amen.